What's up guys, also Footballtalk here. We're just a couple of weeks away from the NFL kickoff game between the Lions and Chiefs, so before I predict the entire 2023 season next week, I thought it was time to highlight some situations across the league that are highly volatile and I'm most interested to keep track in how they work out. These can be players, team units or coaches heading into crucial years, which I'll be keeping a close eye on, and the involved parties could get desperate here. So you won't find something like, can Patrick Mahomes win a third ring and challenge Tom Brady for GOAT status, and similar generic sports debate show topics included here. Altogether, I came up with 8 questions I'm waiting to have answered, plus I added a few more players at the end who are heading into big seasons. For now, I will provide the background information, key factors, and my personal opinion on those. And if you enjoyed the discussion, please make sure to leave a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so yet for all my other content. Here we go with this one though, and the first question up is, can Ryan Tannehill fend off another rookie in Tennessee? Before I get into anything further with this situation however, let me just say that Ryan Tannehill isn't getting the credit he deserves for what he's done since taking over quarterback in Tennessee back in 2019. Since grabbing the starting gig that year, if you take out Drew Brees, who retired midway through that stretch, the only quarterback with a high EP per play and completion percentage above expected is Patrick Mahomes. Tannehill led the NFL in yards per attempt and passer rating in 2019, then in 2020 he executed a league high 6 game-winning drives, and then took the Titans to the AFC's #1 seed in 2021, before dealing with a sprained ankle this past season, when the team was still at least 500 in games he started, and he had a 13-6 touchdown to interception ratio. So really, as you look at the individual player, the fact he's referred to as a replacement level starter seems unfair and very much based on recency bias, since he threw those 3 interceptions in the 21 divisional round loss to the Bengals, and then couldn't push off his bummed ankle for most of last season. Yet the Titans are clearly looking for ways to move into a different stage. After Tannehill replaced Marcus Mariota in Tennessee, the only other competition he faced over the next 2.5 seasons was Logan Woodside, who's completed 1 pass in the regular season to this point, and is now third string on the depth chart for the Falcons. Last year, they used the third round pick Malik Willis out of Liberty, who surprisingly fell after being favored to go in the first round. He was QB1 on my board in a class that lacked high prospects, because I thought he had the most arm talent and athletic ability to work with long term, even though I said even that he wasn't ready to play due to how little the offense he operated in would translate to the next level. Well, instead of slowly bringing him along and maybe giving him some playing time late in the year, Tennessee threw him out there in week 8 at Houston, and then again in the short week at Kansas City on Thursday night. And while they protected him with a bunch of screen passes and stuff like that to get him somewhat comfortable, the game clearly was moving too fast for him mentally, and a decimated wide receiver corps couldn't cash in on some pretty good deep balls that he threw up for them. So after one more disappointing week 16 start, they inserted Joshua Dobbs instead to play for the AFC South title in the season finale. Therefore, the Titans came back in this year's draft, and after reportedly trying to trade back into the late first round, they moved up to the second selection of day 2 for Kentucky's Will Levis. He had a very interesting journey to his eventual NFL destination. The former 3-star recruit started his career at Penn State, but due to not being able to beat out Sean Clifford, who shockingly was selected by the Packers in the 4th round after being regarded as an undrafted prospect based on consensus boards, Levis decided to transfer to Kentucky. In his 2021 debut season with the Wildcats, he accounted for 3,300 total yards and 33 touchdowns compared to 13 interceptions, making a name for himself with his rocket arm and physical running style. That's when he was working under offensive coordinator Liam Cohen, who spent 2022 with the LA Rams before just returning to the program. With several losses on the O-line and wide receiver room, along with a new offensive system that didn't do him many favors, on top of injuries to his foot, finger and throwing shoulder, he actually took a slight step back and couldn't show off his running style at all due to that. Still, he was considered to be in the mix with the 3 quarterbacks who ultimately went within the first 4 picks this past April, and was even the betting favorite to go second overall to Houston on draft day still. Instead, he fell all the way out of the first round, and now has something to prove. His fall was kind of shocking, because even though there were definitely some issues with his tape, and you can go back to all my draft stuff if you want to hear more about that, the ability to operate in a pro-style system, how easy you could create velocity in the ball, and his toughness are very much what the NFL has typically coveted. Reports this offseason have been kind of mixed so far. First there was noise about Willis potentially not even making the active roster, yet later he was supposedly outperforming Levis in camp, and recording this shortly after week 1 of preseason, the second-year quarterback certainly looked better in their first action this year. Considering Tennessee has been putting Tannehill in the promotional videos when they presented the throwback using all jerseys and stuff like that, it appears he's the guy for now though. So this is very much a volatile situation to keep track of, and while the Titans may be better than Vegas thinks, the offensive line has a chance to be a disaster, and while still very impressive in terms of starting 11, they are super thin on defense. Better health should be on the horizon though, considering they were at least average statistically, despite by far leading the NFL in adjusted games lost according to Football Outsiders on that side of the ball. We'll have to see if Tannehill can bounce back with a healthy foot, and if the team can stay in the playoff hunt. Otherwise the organization will continue to ask themselves, how high can we really climb with this type of quarterback, and eventually see what they have in their young guys. That brings us to a second question here. Is this Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio's last gasp? I don't want to go on a tangent here too far and act like these guys haven't been big figures in the NFL over the last 1.5 or even 2 decades, but is there a bigger discrepancy between name recognition and actual success on the field than with these two guys in the nation's capital? 2022, when the Commanders went 8-1, was actually just the third of 12 seasons in which Ron Rivera's team won more than 7 games as a head coach. Del Rio is 1 game below 500 in his career running the show as a head coach, but it's the lack of success defensively, so the unit that he coaches, that is really underwhelming. Following his early years in Jacksonville, between 2008 and 20, the only time in 12 seasons a team that he was part of as a head coach or defensive coordinator that finished top 10 in points allowed was the 2012 Broncos, which were loaded with talent, and the year he was swapped out for Wade Phillips there, Denver promptly won the Super Bowl on the backs of a dominant defense, carrying a disintegrated Payton Manning during his farewell tour. When this duo arrived in Washington, they impressively fielded the 4th-ranked scoring defense and went 7-9 with a combination of Dwayne Haskins, Kyle Allen, and Alex Smith on one leg, sharing time at quarterback. However, since then, they haven't really improved and haven't paved the way for some of the young players to shine. There is something to be said about developing late-round picks and finding value in unexpected places, but you have to question how much credit we can give them for Terry McLaurin turning himself into a true alpha receiver as a 3rd rounder, and the 2 starting safeties in Cam Curl and Derek Forrest coming out of nowhere as late-round picks to become fringe Pro Bowl caliber performers. Meanwhile, they haven't been able to orchestrate a consistent rushing attack offensively, averaging more than 4 yards per rush in one of those 3 years. They're hoping Jahan Dotson can finally be that legit number 2 to Scary Terry. Thanks in part to the medical staff as well, Chase Young has yet to really do anything since showcasing the obvious talent that he has as a defensive rookie of the year, and William Jackson III went from a young standout to a player that would be traded and later released midway through his 2nd season of a massive deal, in part due to the static zone coverages that they used, which made the middle of the field free real estate for opposing quarterbacks at times. Plus, of course, their own quarterback situation has been an absolute mess, which is the biggest reason they have yet to finish higher than 23rd in points scored, while they didn't get the most promising of the bunch in Sam Howell onto the field until week 18 of his rookie season last year, and now he'll be the week 1 starter most likely. So whether it's player development, personnel decisions, or schematic advantages they've tried to create, and they made then offensive coordinator Scott Turner the sacrificial lamb this past season, after he was the most innovative coach they had on that staff, I could argue, it's been an underwhelming development for the Commanders. And to be fair to the guys there, they've had as many team names over that stretch as years that staff has worked together, while operating under the most erratic, destructive owner in the league, who was just forced to sell a franchise. However, that brings me to my main point here. Next to the on-field improvements, this new ownership group has no ties to the current staff or owes them anything for steering the ship over this uncertain 3-year period. Since the transaction didn't become official until late July, the new decision makers at the top in Josh Harris and company didn't have time to assemble a new core, but things may change next offseason. If Howell becomes a legit starting quarterback and the young skill position guys around him show promise, while Chase Young lives up to his potential and leads the defense to another top 10 finish, I think Rivera and Del Rio are safe for another year. Yet if they finish 4th inside the NFC East again, I think we could see a complete overhaul, and if it's just the offense that takes a big step, they may look at Eric Bieniemy coming over as offensive coordinator and his ability to take the Chiefs' success with him to some degree, and decide to make him the new face of this operation, since he has built up all the cachet to be a head coach at this point. bringing us to question number 3, has Indy's Great Wall been rebuilt, or is it crumbling? One of the most surprising developments for position group across the NFL over the last few years has been the recent downfall of the Colts offensive line. And this almost feels like a bizarre world, considering how the lack of attention this organization used to give to that unit in the early 2010s led to Andrew Luck ultimately retiring due to the punishment he took over the years behind the poor protection that he received. The real turning point was drafting Quentin Nelson 6th overall in the 2018 class, as he instantly performed like an all-pro guard and helped the rest of that group elevate their level of play. However, after 4 seasons of being among the top 4 names at the position according to the Associated Press, he and the Pro Bowl level center Ryan Kelly at best were average starters last season. Really only right tackle Braden Smith lived up to what we're accustomed to seeing from those guys. Jonathan Taylor led the league in rushing in 2021, and the Colts were number 1 in rushing EPA as a team. Then last season, they plummeted all the way down to 30th in that regard. Along with that, only the Broncos allowed more than the 60 sacks that Indy surrendered last season. In 2021, they allowed 1 more sack than the team that finished with the lowest mark at 32. Not only did those standout performers along the front drop off to net neutrals, I would say, but left tackle was a major concern for more than half the year. Matt Pryor started the first month of the season there, before switching over to right guard for a bit, and inserting then third-round rookie Bernard Ryman. The young Austrian got destroyed in his debut on Thursday night against the Broncos and ended up getting benched early the following week for Dennis Kelly. 2 more weeks passed before Ryman got back into the lineup and certainly took a big step forward. Yet that was half the season where they just couldn't get settled on the blind side. Right guard is where they made a switch from Danny Pinter, a career backup with versatility on the interior, to Will Fries, who presented a much sturdy and powerful presence, but had his issues staying in front of guys in passing situations as well. With the reigning rushing king being limited to 10 games basically, and even then fighting for injuries, they relied on a staple of replacement level ball carriers. And then of course they had a statue dropping back behind that O-line in Matt Ryan, whose arm fell off in a dramatic way, which cut down the field substantially and allowed defenses to put their opponents into a box. Plus, Sam Allen and Nick Foles both started multiple weeks and looked lost out there themselves. With all that in mind, you might be surprised to hear that the only notable veteran these Colts added up front this offseason was former Lion Dan Skipper for less than $1 million this year. Otherwise, they drafted Blake Freeland out of BYU with one of the first picks of day 3, and Jake Witt out of Northern Michigan in the 7th round as 2 developmental prospects, along with adding Alabama guard Emil Achior as a shocking undrafted free agent, at least in my eyes. So this is a chance to really go 2 different ways. Either Ryman breaks out in year 2, like I predicted early in the offseason, and wrote a piece on that if you want to check it out, over to footballtalk.com. Achior at least adds some competition to right guard, and the proven commodities they do have, other than what we saw in 2022, actually live up to that. The other option is that the development of Ryman stagnates, the second guard spot is still a weak link, some nicks and bruises continue to bother Quentin Nelson, and Ryan Kelly is now on the decline as a player. Both of those walls exist, and it'll be up to if a few of those guys can take a step back up or up altogether, how much Shane Steichen's offensive system can enhance the strengths of the individual pieces, and if rookie quarterback Anthony Richardson can take some pressure off that group by creating plays off script. That'll determine if this unit can bounce back or stay at a below average level. Switching back over to the NFC side of things, my next question is, how might Raheem Morris jumble together a Rams defense? Since Sean McVay arrived in Los Angeles in 2017, the Rams have been a league average defense pretty much every year, other than 2020, when Brandon Staley took over for then defensive coordinator Wade Phillips, who McVay originally paired up with in LA, and he finished number 1 overall in yards and points allowed. Following that season, Staley took over the other LA franchise in the Chargers, and Raheem Morris replaced him for the voided position of calling plays on defense. They were good enough on that side of the ball to support a top 10 offense with Matt Stafford now being inserted at quarterback, and a guy stepping up during the Super Bowl run, which was the ultimate goal for their all-in approach. But when they were banged up across the offensive side of the ball this past season, Morris's unit finished 21st in points allowed, the worst mark in the McVay era. After some rumors around the headman transitioning to the media side of things, and his franchise going into complete overhaul mode potentially, it was announced that he and Morris will be back for 2023 as the 2 main guys running the show, and they're facing the toughest challenge yet. Morris has had a pretty diverse coaching journey, going from a GA and then defensive backs coach at Hofstra to entering the NFL with a job and defensive quality control in 2002, and outside of one season as defensive coordinator at Kansas State, worked his way up the ranks with the Buccaneers until being elevated to head coach status in 2009, following the trade of John Gruden to the Raiders, when Raheem was just 32 years old. Tampa Bay unsurprisingly was a mess in 2 of the 3 years he was calling the shots there, winning 3, 10, and then 4 games as the Bucs finished below 500 in all but one season from that point on, until Tom Brady arrived 3 years ago. Meanwhile, Morris spent 3 years in Washington as their DB coach before joining Dan Quinn's staff in Atlanta, but he actually started working with Kyle Shanahan instead as a wide receiver coach and passing game specialist before picking back up defensive coordinator duties and serving as interim head coach in 2020 once Quinn was fired. Now 14 years after first being named head coach in Tampa, he's entering his 3rd season as DC with the Rams and is regarded as one of the brighter minds among coaches at still only 46 years old. Looking at the Rams defense over the past 5 seasons, and really the entire roster, they've been very much built on the Stars and Scrubs principle, with Aaron Donald as their only homegrown talent, and being a centerpiece of their operation, winning Defensive Player of the Year on 3 different occasions. They've run through veteran names like Marcus Peters, Aqib Talib, Ndamukong Suh, Eric Weddle, Leonard Floyd, Von Miller, Bobby Wagner, and of course Jalen Ramsey. However, after the GM Les Snead literally wore a F them Picks shirt at their 2022 Super Bowl parade, they got what they could in trading away Ramsey to the Dolphins and let a bunch of veterans go in order to get the cap aligned properly again. The result of this is that they only have Aaron Donald and Ernest Jones still there in terms of starters from the Super Bowl 1.5 years ago only, along with Jordan Fuller as the only other legit contributor from that season. According to outlets.com, among the 40 defensive players on the roster currently, at least when I'm recording this, 19 of them are rookies, and all but 3 of those were either drafted in the 6th/7th round or went undrafted altogether. In fact, other than the 2 Super Bowl starters I just mentioned, not a single defender currently on the roster logged at least 500 snaps anywhere in the NFL this past season, so there are a bunch of unproven commodities at Morris's disposal other than Donald, who was contemplating retirement these past 2 off-seasons. It'll be up to him now to somehow throw these pieces together and build one cohesive unit. Due to the well-versed background on both sides of the ball, the ideas I've seen him tinker with to stay ahead of the competition, yet how sound he is in his principles, I believe he's well equipped to field a squad that isn't just catastrophic. However, thinking about that one pass rusher who can win one-on-one if AD is neutralized by a double team, a linebacker who can make a key tackle in the open field, or a corner who can man up against one of the top flight receivers on 3rd downs, I just don't know if they have those guys on the roster or who they might be. Now, midway through the video, not only would it be great if you could hit the like button, but we'll also get to the 2 guys on the cover photo here. And the question to me is, how can Sean Payton revamp Russell Wilson? If you believe the words of the new Broncos head coach, talking about the 2022 Broncos, this supposedly was one of the worst coaching jobs in NFL history. Understandably, he wants to take some heat off his quarterback Russell Wilson and the offensive unit altogether, but while we can debate if he should air out that dirty laundry, which I'm very much on the side of Nathaniel Hackett for taking the high road and Aaron Rodgers defending his coach with the Jets, we have to assume Payton felt inclined to speak on it based on some of the things he's heard from everybody around the organization. Whether it was not finding a true identity in offense, where Hackett and company tried to fit Russ into more of a West Coast offense, but he didn't feel comfortable working those more traditional progressions, the lack of comprehensive game plans, the horrendous red zone installs, and generally the poor time management, getting plays in accordingly, or using timeouts effectively. Wilson finished 25th in expected points added per play among quarterbacks, and the Broncos offense finished 27th as a unit. Across Payton's 14 years as the head coach in New Orleans, the Saints finished in the top 3 5 times and never below 9th, other than his final season there, when they went from Jameis Winston to Taysom Hill and finally Travis Simeon as the starting quarterbacks. And looking at Russ's track record in Seattle, they were an above average offense in terms of EPA all 10 years there as well. So there is reason to believe that more stability around the coaching staff that can either design a plan that enhances the strengths of the single call and personnel altogether, or helps transform Russ into a different version of himself as he enters the twilight of his career earlier than we might have expected, should really help out. Being dead last in adjusted games lost as a team, according to Football Outsiders, certainly didn't help matters last season. Denver has a top 10 left tackle in Garrett Bowles returning from injury, They signed Mike McGlinchey to shore up what has been a problem spot on the opposite end of the line for several years now, and with Ben Powers taking over left guard, they now have one of the most tenacious duos there between him and Twin Miners and the things that they can do in the run game. How exactly they use their skill position weaponry will be interesting to track because of how many different ways they've approached this, but what I do know is that they've made the tight end room a priority, and we'll see personnel sets with multiple of those guys regularly. What's going to be interesting is if Sean Payton looks at Greg Dulcich as a designated power slot, since he has tremendous team stretching ability as a third round pick from a year ago, and unfortunately they won't have Tim Patrick after all, who I originally had mentioned here returning from injury, has filled that role in the past and is under contract for a couple more years. I feel really bad for him having suffered another injury that will cost him a full year. Meanwhile, Jerry Jeudy mainly operated inside at Alabama, but has been used more as a field stretcher in the pros, while they traded up late into the second round of the draft for Oklahoma's undersized speedster Marvin Mims, along with Courtland Sutton being more of your prototypical X. Either way, I would expect the new head coach to figure out how to deploy those guys best, and what's encouraging is just having a broad menu to choose from. That's along with a more well-versed rushing attack, tying run and pass game together, and those designer or even trick plays that we saw on a weekly basis for such a long time in New Orleans. With that being said, while there's reason to believe in what Payton is building in Denver, there's no guarantee he can fix what we saw from Russ last season, and as crazy as this may sound, after sending 2 first round, 2 second rounds, and a pair of day 3 picks, along with a couple of players to Seattle for their supposed savior in the center, bringing in Payton and investing extra draft capital on him may suggest that he's the guy this new ownership group wants to base their future around, rather than a 34-year-old quarterback on the decline. And since we just talked about Sean Payton, let's get to a player that he used to coach until last year and ask ourselves, is Michael Thomas still a real NFL wide receiver? And this is obviously a bit hyperbolic, but man, it's been a long time since we've seen this guy do anything. If Thomas were to never at least put up like a 7 or 800 yard season again, his career will go down as one of the weirdest in NFL history. A top 50 pick out of Ohio State back in 2016, Mike T caught 92 passes for over 1,100 yards and 9 touchdowns as a rookie. His numbers increased each of the next 3 seasons, ultimately setting the NFL record with 149 receptions for over 1,700 yards in 2019 and winning Offensive Player of the Year. However, that's where things started to go off the rails completely. After receiving a 5-year, $96 million contract that following off-season, he suffered an ankle injury week 1 and was never quite the same. Surprisingly, he decided to push surgery to the summer of 2021 and subsequently missed that entire season, bringing up questions about his investment into the Saints organization as a whole, particularly after the retirement of Drew Brees. After restructuring his contract, we did see some flashes of the old can't guard Mike to start last season, with 16 catches for 171 yards over the first 3 weeks, highlighted by a couple of touchdown grabs over All-Pro Falcons corner AJ Terrell in the opener. However, yet another foot injury knocked him out for the rest of the season. That's why a split between the two sides seemed evident this spring, but instead New Orleans landed former Raiders quarterback Derek Carr and reworked Thomas' deal once more, signaling that they want to make this thing work. Considering all of those factors, it's pretty tough to predict what version of the former All-Pro receiver we might see in 2023. Thomas has never been a burner necessarily, or somebody who will make defenders miss in the open field with dynamic moves. Rather, it was his ability to create angles for the ball to arrive, how he would use his body to shield passes, and being able to hold onto him for contact, as Sean Payton's new and improved version of Marcus Colston's power slot and possession style option. Since he played pretty much all of 2020 with a banged up ankle, I will judge him more so on what he did in limited action last season, and went back to the tape to see what he looked like again. He did still display the ability to win with late hands, come down with those combat catches, and showed impressive body control near the sideline. However, he did seem more sloppy at the breakpoint, not being able to consistently create separation, and was flagged for offensive pass interference twice because sticky man corners troubled him leading up to the catch points, but he was still able to swallow the ball. Offensive coordinator Pete Carmichael has been in New Orleans since 2006 and assumed that role 3 years later, so he understands what kind of role Mike T can excel in and will try to set him up to be productive, work in the middle of the field, and putting him in position to make plays in 50-50 situations, rather than asking him to win one-on-one the outside regularly. Nobody should expect him to return anywhere close to all-pro form, in particular this season, with Chris Olave coming off a 1,000-yard rookie campaign in 15 games, but he showed the skills to win on all three levels of the field and move the chains by consistently getting open, finishing 16 yards per route run among wide receivers with 50+ targets. With that being said, can he be a reliable number 2 who they hit on slant or dig routes on third down, where he holds onto the ball through contact and blocks out his man on goal line fades or jump balls on secondary plays? Looking at the collection of Raheem Morris, Tre'Quan Smith, Brian Edwards, and 6th round pick A.T. Perry out of Wake Forest, they need somebody to step up and take advantage of favorable looks as teams decide to bracket Olave. Sticking with an NFC team mostly known for their defense, my question is, will there be more successful reclamation projects on San Francisco's defensive line? The 49ers have had a lot of success picking up formerly highly touted draft picks on the open market, putting them into the defensive line room, and allowing them to finally live up to their potential, or at least turning them into viable contributors up front. Over the last couple of years, that includes names like Maurice Hurst, Arden Key, Jordan Willis, and Charles Omenihu. Not only has competition brought the best out of those guys, and they've all come in with a lot of energy on the limited amount of snaps that they received, but the D-line coach Chris Kasurek has done a tremendous job of helping those guys grow their game and build on strengths, along with putting them in position to succeed by the way they've developed them. This year's duo of new applicants to the school of revitalized D-line talent are Clelin Ferrell and Taco Charlton. The former was the 4th overall pick in the 2019 draft, and the first selection made by then general manager Mike Mayock, to the surprise of many people in the media and at home. Ferrell basically played 2/3 of defensive snaps through his first 2 seasons, but only recorded 6.5 sacks and 36 pressures across those, according to Pro Football Reference. Over the past 2 years, 32 total games that is, he basically matched the snap total that he logged as a rookie and didn't become any more productive relative to playing time, while Max Crosby has become one of the most disruptive defensive linemen since getting drafted in the 4th round that same year as Ferrell. Meanwhile, Charlton was a 1st round pick by the Cowboys back in 2017, which almost feels weird now because of the success that they've had recently at developing young defensive linemen. 2 weeks into his 3rd season, he was put on waivers by Dallas and picked up by Miami, his most productive destination, logging right around 400 snaps each of the first 3 seasons. Since then he's bounced around between 5 different teams, not making an after-practice squad for 2 of them, totaling slightly less than 400 regular season snaps between those. 5 of his 11.5 career sacks came in 2019 with the Dolphins, and he never went over 10 pressures in any year. Now those guys enter yet another pretty impressive room in San Francisco, coming off a season in which he led the NFL in DVOA, EP per play, points per game, and several other categories on defense. With the big free agency addition of Javon Hargrave, to put next to hopefully a healthy Rick Armstead throughout the season, they can put Javon Kinlaw in more of a rotational role on the interior. However, other than Nick Bosa, they don't have many proven commodities on the edge. I have big hopes for last year's 2nd round pick Drake Jackson, with more extended run this season, but other than that, Kerry Hyder has been the most effective player by far among that group, although he has only cracked multiple sacks twice in his career himself. Past those names, we've got a pretty raw athlete in Robert Beal Jr., who was selected in the 5th round this year, and another guy I could have listed here is somewhat of a reclamation project as an early day free pick for Detroit in Austin Bryant, who funnily enough played opposite of Clelin Ferrell at Clemson, but has only played double-digit games in the NFL in one of his 4 seasons so far. So there'll be plenty of opportunity to prove their worth for Ferrell and Charlton in theory. We'll have to see if Drake Jackson even fully absorbs Samson Ebickam's 52% of snaps from last season, but even then, there are nearly 800 more defensive snaps available between Charles Omenihu and Jordan Willis departing, as they typically use a fairly deep rotation with the idea of keeping the guys fresh. And the final topic for today, can the added youth and altered mindset reinvigorate the Vikings secondary? The Fangio style of defense under quotation marks took the NFL by storm this past offseason in particular, but unlike the innovative defensive mind who's coaching the NFL for the last 37 years, a lot of the guys associated with that system who have recently taken play calling jobs on that side of the ball don't understand how to change up looks post snap and teach the intricacies of what they're running in favor of just sitting back in quarters and letting opposing quarterbacks pick apart those static, conservative looks. To me, the pinnacle of that revolution, once again in quotation marks, was Fangio Disciple at Donatello, sticking in cover 6 or cover 8 for the majority of nearly 70 snaps in the wildcard round, and the Giants' Daniel Jones destroying it with his arm and legs in order to send the 13-win Vikings home. Not even a week later, that got the defensive coordinator fired. However, to be fair towards Donatello, he had less to work with than a couple of marquee names would indicate. While guys like Harrison Smith and Patrick Peterson did perform like quality starters, both of them intercepting 5 passes each overshadows that on a snap-by-snap basis, they're much closer to the twilights of their careers than their primes. With Harry Hittman and Cameron Bynum as the only 2 of 5 starters returning for 2023, they'll be relying on several young players to step up. From a schematic or mindset perspective, new defensive coordinator and former Dolphins head coach Brian Flores has a background that would suggest he'll attack rather than sit back a lot more. At Miami, he and then defensive coordinator Josh Boyer orchestrated one of the most disruptive defensive units in the league, where they would find ways to manipulate protections and create free rushers with the cover 0 reign, where the potential rushers decide if they actually come forward, depending on if they're being blocked or not. That put them near the top of the league in pressures and also takeaways, as quarterbacks had to make quick decisions, while the secondary was very well taught on which concepts to anticipate, what to expect out of certain formations, and to attack the first break in order to crowd the catch points. This past season without Flores, who was fired due to reasons unrelated to on-field success, we saw the limitations of that approach when Boyer was by himself and would basically call it on every third down, rather than keeping offenses guessing and being selective with when they would bring it. With B-Flow spending a year in Pittsburgh, he has familiarized himself with a different type of system that used cover 1 on early downs, but then relied a lot more on zone blitzes and shrinking the field for opposing passers by squeezing down windows once they got to obvious passing situations. So I'd expect him to give opposing quarterbacks more variety of looks. In terms of personnel on the roster, like I said in my video on the biggest remaining needs for each NFC team, you can't fault them for not addressing the secondary, considering over the last 4 years, they've now invested 8 picks across the first 4 rounds into their group, along with bringing on veteran Patrick Peterson on a couple of 1-year contracts, and this offseason signing Byron Murphy to a 2-year, $17.5 million deal. However, now other than Harrison Smith and Murphy, you're looking at all players that are either still on the rookie deals or were cut whilst they were on their first contracts from the teams that originally selected them. I personally really like both of last year's 2 second-round picks in Lewis Cine and Andrew Booth Jr., but according to some reports out there, they're not even really in competition for starting spots. Right now, 2 picks from the early 100s these last 2 years, in Caleb Evans and USC's Mekhi Blackman, might be the favorites for the 2 outside corner spots if they want to keep Murphy in his best role inside. However, behind those, you have 2 safeties now in Smith and Cam Bynum, who are more so marginal athletes, at least at this stage for Smith. So that creates sort of a dichotomy in terms of a young corner room, probably better suited to play man, and safeties behind it that may have the smarts to make good decisions, playing off man in a pressure-heavy scheme, but might get toasted if some speeds as inside go vertical against them. I'd say overall it was time for them to overhaul that defense entirely, and I'm excited to see how much Brian Flores can improve that unit, but the majority of the pieces in the secondary are either unknowns or at least question marks. How quickly they can acclimate themselves and perform at a high level will dictate if the Vikings are fighting for the NFC North crown again, since the offense should have a pretty high baseline, as a top 10 passing attack at least, with room up in terms of the run game. That does it for the 8 main questions I wanted to talk through, and like I said at the start, here are some other players heading into crucial years. First up, quarterback Sam Darnold. The former number 3 overall pick is now on his 3rd team in 4 years, and may not get another chance to start or work under a better coach from this one onwards. He's always been very talented, but if he gets a chance to run this Kyle Shanahan offense at some point and can keep this machinery running, the perception among even hardcore Darnold believers will probably change. Another quarterback in Jordan Love, following in the footsteps of Aaron Rodgers and first ballot Hall of Fame quarterback play for the last 30 consecutive years. The coaching staff there may understand what reasonable expectations are for Love, but people growing up there who have only seen that type of quarterback play and the national media may not. Matt LaFleur is a fairly proven commodity, I would say, as a coach, and he still have some recognizable names there, but his most experienced pass catcher is barely utilized 30-year tight end / H-back Josiah DeGuara. Running back DeAndre Swift is someone who's always been considered one of the most dynamic threats at the running back position, and I was really excited about him as a high 2nd round pick myself. but the elusiveness and big play numbers have never quite lived up to the hype, and almost been banged up regularly, which is why Detroit ultimately moved on from him. Now he'll be running behind the league's top offensive line, but will have to establish himself in a crowded backfield. Logan Thomas for the Commanders. After making the transition from college quarterback to NFL tight end, it took Thomas until his 5th season to break out with Washington, when he caught 72 passes for 670 yards and 6 touchdowns. Since then, he's become a forgotten name again, with just over 500 yards and 4 scores over the following 20 games. Does new offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy envision at least somewhat of a Travis Kelce-oriented role, or will he feel out of place? And Jets offensive tackle Mekhi Becton, the first of several names here to discuss from the 2020 draft. Becton looked like a franchise left tackle as a rookie for the Jets, but his career development has been an utter catastrophe since then. He's only played in 1 game over the last 2 years combined, battling knee injuries and having major issues with fluctuating weight. He's likely starting on the right side this year after transitioning there ahead of 2022, but there's no guarantee he'll make it through the season. On the defensive side of the ball, Chase Young, also for the Commanders, the number 2 overall pick from the 2020 draft, ahead of guys like Justin Herbert, Andrew Thomas, and 3 other All-Pro first rounders. Young was the defensive rookie of the year, but hasn't really done anything since then, fighting through injuries and not standing out as he should, with just 1.5 sacks and 3 tackles for loss over the 12 other games. 3 years ago, if you had told me that Young's 50-year option would be declined, it would have been because he could have had a mega contract at this point, which he could still receive next offseason theoretically. Javon Kinlaw, who I mentioned earlier with the 49ers, when they traded Pro Bowler DeForest Buckner to the Colts back in 2020, they used the 14th overall pick in the draft, which they got back in the Buckner deal, on Kinlaw out of South Carolina, expecting him to eventually step into the shoes left behind by what I thought was their most disruptive player during the Super Bowl run. While Defoe has continued to flourish in Indy, Kinlaw has only played in 14 games, not recorded a sack since his rookie season, and been a questionable run defender at times. Kenneth Murray for the Chargers. The entire NFL community has some egg on their face for their evaluation of the 2020 linebacker class, as the Seahawks' Jordan Brooks has been the most effective among the 3 names selected late in the first round, and even some from day 2, despite him being the most scrutinized one. Murray in particular has always had the athletic traits to become an impact player on the second level, but the mental side has never quite caught up, and now 3rd round pick Dion Henley is nipping at his heels for that second inside linebacker spot. Another Charger in J.C. Jackson, considering LA handed Jackson a 5-year, $82.5 million contract in free agency a year ago. They can't feel great about the defense improving once he ruptured his patella tendon and Michael Davis stepped into that role as the boundary corner. While you can argue if he was as proficient on a snap-by-snap basis in New England, the ball production speaks for itself, leading the NFL with 17 interceptions and 37 pass breakups over the final 2 seasons there. If he can't turn things around again, LA will be looking to get out of that contract in 2024 the latest. And finally, Darnell Savage, the Packers safety. I was a huge fan of Savage coming out of Maryland, thanks to his ferocious playstyle, where he always went full speed and didn't show any regard for his body. While he's barely missed any time, being sub 200 pounds has led to him being banged up at times, and his play has fallen off throughout his 4 years in Green Bay, with passer ratings allowed in the mid-110s, each of the latter 2. Now without his running mate and Adrian Amos on the back end, there'll be even more pressure on him to perform well. That's gonna do it for this one though. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this discussion about pivotal player and coaching situations, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so yet. I'll have a bunch of cool stuff coming out during the season, which you definitely don't want to miss if you're a football fan. At the time I'm releasing this, we're just about 2 weeks away from the 2023 NFL season being kicked off, which means somewhere between the Friday and the Monday before the opener, I will still release my predictions for all the NFL awards and playoffs, which will come out in written form at hellos@footballtalk.com. That's where you can find all of my content, so just click the link in the description below for more, and why don't you follow me on social media to stay tuned with everything I do. I'll throw out fantasy advice, my betting picks, and a bunch of other stuff, definitely worth considering. For now, I've got plenty to read up on or to listen to from this offseason to get you ready for when players finally hit the field, including the video I put out last week on my favorite fantasy values for 2023, and I'm happy to engage into further discussion in the comments. So until then, see you later. Peace!